So I got to tell you, this conversation we had the other day in studio kind of inspired today's monologue. You may know if you actually see it when you see the title, it's called It's Better to Burn Out Than to Fade Away. Oh, if you remember the conversation, you know where I'm heading now. It's better to burn out than to fade away. Look, I'm inspired by real people who do amazing things, especially when those real people do those amazing things despite all the odds being against them. Look, I don't know your particular situation, but I feel certain that almost everybody that can hear my voice has had something in your life that seemed to bring your dreams or your hopes or your possibilities to a halt. And then you were faced with that moment in time when you had to make a choice. Do I continue on in spite of the setbacks, or do I stop now or take my losses and just call it done? Only you, only you can determine the answer to that question. But I do know this: there is nothing new under the sun. We are told in 1 Corinthians 10:13, there is no such thing as a temptation that you're enduring that someone else hasn't already endured, and that God will give us the strength to endure and overcome those situations. Now, that verse is specifically related to temptation, but I believe that it's also accurate to say that disappointments are also nothing new. There's no such thing as a setback or a trial or a disappointment that somebody else hasn't already lived through. Let me tell you about one guy who overcame something and did things that everyone said could not be done. So yeah, like I mentioned a moment ago, recently JP and I were talking here in the studio about classic rock, and I'm proud to say that JP has good taste in music. But somewhere in the conversation, I asked a trivia question about one of the most unusual bands, one of the most successful bands in all of classic rock. One of the most successful bands, perhaps of all time. And if you get down to it, perhaps one of the most inspiring bands in all of classic rock. So I'm a kid of the 80s, right? I'm a kid of the 80s. And as you might imagine, soft rock was never my thing. Soft rock, that was good for slow dances at homecoming dances and stuff. Generally speaking, when I drove my 68 Mustang around Huntsville in the early 80s, I was listening to things like Boston and Journey and Styx and Bad Company. And when I was really getting pumped up for something or feeling my oats just a little bit, I cranked up some Def Leppard. Now, regardless of how you feel about rock music in general, and especially Def Leppard, you need to know the story of their drummer, a guy named Rick Allen. So Rick Allen was apparently a drum prodigy. He was playing gigs in Sheffield, England when he was 13. And at 14 years old, his mom answered a want ad for him for some unknown upcoming band looking for a new drummer. And that band was called Def Leppard. So Rick Allen auditioned and he joined the band on his 15th birthday, believe it or not, 15. He joined the band on his 15th birthday. He dropped out of school to pursue a career then as a rock drummer. By the time he was 16, he was playing major gigs and opening for AC/DC. The world was his oyster. The first two albums, met with some success, but in 1983, they released an album called Pyromania, had two singles that hit the top of the charts, and the album itself just went platinum. So at 20 years old, Rick Allen and the rest of the band had hit the big time. And Rick pursued his dream, and he bought a brand new Corvette. Big doings, y'all. He's living the dream, and he buys the red Corvette, and he's driving it around England. Not a common car over there. But the very next year, Rick and his girlfriend, they were driving the Corvette along country roads in England, and another car came racing alongside them and actually ran them off the road. They both survived the accident. His girlfriend had to be cut out of the wreckage. But when Rick Allen came to, he found himself standing out in the field a short distance away from the car, and he was missing his left arm. Doctors tried to reattach the arm, and they were nearly successful, but then gangrene set in, and they had to remove it again at the shoulder. Now, you can imagine what the band was thinking. And I will tell you that despite everything you might think of the younger generation sometimes, well, look, suddenly they get fame and fortune. Yeah, but they still didn't forget their guy. In their words, Rick is in the band until he isn't. Well, so what about Rick? I mean, you can imagine. He's devastated. His whole career depended upon having two arms, two hands, the ability to wield two drumsticks. It wasn't like he was a computer programmer or an accountant or somebody who writes or speaks for a living. He was a drummer. No one had ever heard of a one-armed drummer. Well, his general recovery went well. He had to relearn everything, all of his life skills, everything from tying his shoes to brushing his teeth. All of it had to be relearned. But what about drums? He told the band to start practicing, but not to count him out. They were dubious, but they were like a bunch of brothers, so they indulged him. He was told that he would be in the hospital for 6 months. He was out in 30 days. He was told he would need time to rest and recuperate, but 2 weeks after he was discharged from the hospital, he flew out to meet the band to work on their new album. But he wasn't playing with the band yet. He was in a separate studio down the way with the door shut, practicing for hours on a drum set unlike any before. You see, a friend had told him that new technology existed and he had checked it out. And the designers at a company called the Simmons Drum Company, they met with him. And after taking down all of his thoughts and his dreams and his requests, the Simmons Drum Company engineered and built an electronic drum set that had multiple pedals. And those pedals created like an intricate amount of footwork. I mean, pedals had to go in sequence to make the drums come alive, and combined with his one good arm still going, it actually had the potential to actually sound right. Because I say potential because it was still only a concept. But yeah, it had the potential to make a full drum sound. Those pedals were all laid out for his feet in a row. It's almost like Rick Allen was going to be dancing while he played the drums all at the same time, if he could master the incredibly intricate sequences. These drums, by the way, I watched a video on them. These drums have to be reprogrammed almost for every song because it changes the pitch based on how he does it. And he has to actually learn every song the same way he would when he was drumming with his hands, but now he's dancing with his feet. Well, Allen stayed locked away in his studio for 3 weeks. He'd come out to have meals with the band. He'd go right back to it. One of his bandmates said he'd been in there just playing and playing. He wanted to make all the mistakes on his own. But then he called us in one day. He said, "Listen to this." And he played the song When the Levee Breaks. And he said, we all ended up crying. And from that moment on, his band members said, we all began to believe. Well, the rest is history. Def Leppard, with Rick Allen as their one-armed drummer, went on to achieve levels unlike any band before, with 2 of their albums reaching diamond status with sales of over 10 million. They are one of only 5 bands to ever reach a double diamond. The only others who made it were the Beatles, Led Zeppelin, Pink Floyd, and Van Halen. In 2019, Def Leppard was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, all of it with a one-armed drummer who many said would never play again. Rick Allen could have quit. He could have accepted that his career was over and nobody would have blamed him. It would have made sense to retire. I mean, after all, who ever heard of a guy with one arm playing drums in a rock band? Rick Allen still plays with the band today at 61 years old. He and his wife, they actually formed a nonprofit called the Raven Drum Foundation in 2001, whose primary focus has been on helping military amputees in their recovery by giving them drums as part of the focus. And Rick hasn't led a stellar life. He'll be the first to acknowledge that. He had to go to counseling early on. He got into substance abuse, but he's been an overcomer. He's also been an inspiration at the same time. On his own website, Rick Allen said, surviving a car accident and losing my arm could have destroyed my life. Instead, it led me on an unexpected path of finding my deepest strengths. It's a pretty amazing story. A dream shattered, but then the same dream realized. The difference was he didn't quit. My pastor said recently, and I agree, if we don't quit, we win. One of the most famous quotes from Coach Bear Bryant was when he said, never quit. He said, it's the easiest cop-out in the world. You set a goal, you don't quit till you attain it. He said, you set another goal and you don't quit until you reach it. You never quit. So I don't know your situation. I don't. Everybody's got their own thing, right? Life can be hard. It can be very hard. It can be brutal even. And I don't know your personal story. You may have had times when it made perfect sense to quit. Who would question it, right? But somewhere in there, maybe that grit, that resolve, that understanding that God is so, so big and that nothing is new in this world. Someone somewhere has already gone through what you're going through, or worse. And maybe you just needed to hear about a one-armed drummer just to get you up and moving today. So get her done, folks.